I've seen a lot of artists, known a lot of artists who've worked all their life and their work disappears. I find it incredibly sad that those artists who probably weren't very famous but nonetheless were really valuable, work just disappears. I'd always liked the idea of an artist's house, that there is something about the domestic, there's something about the notion that you could control it yourself, quite important. There's a history of the artist's house. It appeals to all of us, the idea that there is somewhere that someone lived, that has a history that is interesting, has old objects in it. It's human to be interested in times past. I've got a quote somewhere which is from Joseph Conrad. The idea of art, it connects lost souls, it connects the living with the dead, and it connects us all to humanity and creativity. Once I had the money, I decided that that's what I was going to do, to have my own house in a community that was interested in a socially aware community, and somewhere in the sun where people could come, enjoy it, maybe have artists living and working in it, and for my family and people to enjoy and see what I've achieved. I came to Potries because I was looking for a town that made things historically. Potries was an old ceramics town. It's close to the coast, it's a small village, it's very community minded, and it's a fabulous village. I bought the house, renovated it, and moved everything in. It's a dream come true, as they say. When you come to the house, it's laid out in a way that is semi-historical. There are drawings on the wall from my student days. Every time I've made a piece of work, paintings in particular, I've brought one here as an example of that particular set of work. A lot of the other work, particularly the paintings and drawings, are still in the UK. So there's a historical development here of drawing. Is also my collection of objects, which have been collected over many years. So you'll see the objects here from which some of the sculptures have been derived. And I wanted the local people to engage with it, particularly the local people to engage with it. And I understand that's quite a long process. It may be something that will only happen on any kind of extent when I'm gone. But I'm happy with the idea that that is a possibility. I do describe myself as a sculptural thinker. Art is an intellectual activity, demands thought. It demands thought through material. It demands thought in terms of how you locate it historically. It demands thought as a philosophical practice. What does it mean in the greater context of things? What does it mean not only to be an artist, but what does it mean to make sculpture? What does sculpture mean? The thinking also applies to painting. It's an intellectual activity. The contemporary thing is that it's about emotion, it's about subjectivity, and anybody can do it. It's about identity. We all have an identity, but the art is to actually put that identity through some kind of process to make sense of it, and that demands thought. And I think it was Umberto Eco who said this, that we're all drawn to certain shapes, like the wing of an aircraft, or the keel of a boat, or the shape of a pear. An instinctive thing that the objects you see around me here, some are appealing to me purely and simply because of the shape. Obviously, it's a unique practice whereby you are endeavouring, usually on your own, but sometimes with assistance, to make something that stands in space, that holds its space, that holds its place through making. I have a collection here of apprentices' models. Some of those things are appealing to me because of the scale. They're large things made small. Some of them are appealing to me because they have a kind of historical significance, or a significance about a location I've been to or lived in. That the interrelationship between those things and those ideas is a whole incredible world of imagination. The sculptor's job, really, is to make new objects, is to make things that haven't been seen. I tend to make quite quiet things because I like quietness, I like silence. So my things don't kind of jump around, they're quite still. But that's where the interest in objects becomes a mainstay of my practice. So there is a space that is very flat, and then there's a space which is between that and an object. A painterly space, illusionary space. It's a space where people essentially tell lies in a good way. That's kind of a difficult space to pin down. And then, of course, there's the three-dimensional space in which you articulate form and measure form. Time becomes a factor in how you make things. I do have a feeling, and I can't quite put my finger on it, that the best sculpture, the best painting has a timeless quality. And that's the hard thing to pin down, that you're always trying to find something that has that timeless quality where people will want to come back again and again to see it. And that's the difference between good art and bad art. I didn't want to keep going with the subjectivity of abstract painting because I realized I needed something to hang my ideas on. Some people use the figure. I went back to using objects, things in the world, things that I found, and went back to the idea of still lives. So the things that are around me in this room are objects that I started to collect, first in Australia, to put together some kind of circular motion, circular notion of how practice might develop. so that it wasn't linear, it was circular. It could be music, it could be literature, it could be poetry, and equally it could be objects. Sculptures in here are made from collections of objects, things, materials, some cast, some constructed, some carved, and they were all based around the idea which came from a poet who was relating the idea of the artist's plinth as his circle of solitude. So I started to make a whole series of sculptures which had the intention of making everything based upon a very small circle. They explore different rhythms, they explore different materials, pieces of stone in relationship to pieces of cast iron, for example, and bits of bronze. So they are sculptures as still life. The house also contains in one of the front rooms the collection of objects which I regard as archive material. And the house also contains an archive of my writings, postcards, letters, lecture notes, and things that relate to my activity as not just a sculptor, but also as a teacher. There's a process whereby I move things, balance things. Balance is important. Make relationships between things, draw things. There's a process that goes off with all my sculptures where I'm trying stuff. Not so much with the paintings. The paintings I find much more difficult to work with. But the sculptures, yes, there is essentially there's a way that I put things together before committing them to some kind of finality. Maybe when I commit them to maybe stone or bronze or something like that, they do lose some of that quality, but they gain something which is a little bit more steadfast. They gain something which is a bit more permanent. So there are different kind of levels, there are different ways that pieces exist. I find painting much more difficult than making sculptures because the brain has to act much more quickly, and the way that you manage a flat surface I find much more difficult to manage. But yes, there are definitely different parts of your brain that are activated with painting and sculpture. I like rules in sculpture, I like conventions in sculpture, and I like the notion that rules are managed with emotions. The rule that corrects the emotion and the emotion that corrects the rule, and that's a kind of curiosity which I think makes a good piece of work. There is something called technique that comes into it, which have rules, but they are also rules that need to be broken. So I try not to become too technical or let the technique drive the work. Equally, I try not to let the emotion drive the work. And then, of course, if I make a very big piece, you've really got to commit to the singular idea that it's going to stay there for a long time. Barnett Newman talked about his paintings being about the sanctity of place. And obviously, if you're making a big piece of sculpture, the place is a major difficulty or asset. If you get to be able to place it where you want to, then you're controlling the space, you're controlling the time, you're controlling how it's seen. You don't always get that opportunity when you're making a big piece of work. And that can be a toss-up whether or not you want to do it or you don't want to do it, how you feel about its role and its existence there. For example, I made a very big sculpture in Grugliasco in near Turin, which is on a roundabout. Not ideal, but it was a monument to the Alpini resistance fighters during the Second World War. So there's kind of mitigations come with wanting to do it because it's a significant thing to do for the place, and whether or not you want it on the roundabout. Place is also very important with the small sculptures, whether it's on a plinth, whether it's on the floor, its scale in relationship to what is next to it. They're all major considerations for a sculptor. Time is an element that you have to include in, I think, in any piece of work. And that's one of the reasons I've used quite a lot of reflective surfaces, because I feel it holds a time element, whether it's the landscape it's in or the clouds passing. It has a kind of quality that time can hold on to. In actual fact, it's more like a film because the image actually moves as you walk round it. So the painting became the painting, or the colours on the surface became an image that moved. Yeah, that's what I call the painting, as it were, not a painting on the wall. One of the kind of breakthrough pieces of work I made was where I made a particular sculpture in stainless steel, which was very difficult to make. It was a curved piece, which curved vertically and curved horizontally, which was both painterly and sculptural. Started to use those reflective surfaces with objects in front, and those objects will distort in curved spaces, creating a kind of a different quality of time, different quality where the objects became a barrier or something on the surface of the sculpture. So you'd have the still life, the objects, you'd have the reflection, and you'd have the sculpture. I was always interested in the idea of reflection, reflectivity as people, the idea of returning yourself to yourself on a continuous basis, which made you think about who you were or who you are. When you start on this wonderful thing called art, curiosity is everything. It's the history behind it, that drives you. It's the kind of notion that sculpture in particular and painting is an idea. It's an idea that stretches back historically through many, many centuries. So curiosity is everything. If you lose the curiosity about your subject, if it becomes a style or a technique or just a craft, then the curiosity is lost. The history of painting, the history of sculpture, I believe, are ideas within themselves. They're not things that exist in isolation. They have a context. When I studied in Greece, it taught me that if you look at some of the archaic Greek sculptures, there's an idea there that has persisted. The belief is that it's not something singularly for purchase, it's not something singularly for people to buy and sell. It is an entity in itself that needs to be studied, understood, and furthered by the people like me and anyone else who does it to perhaps progress what we understand about humanity. For example, I particularly like Morandi's work, always have done, and only 5-6 years ago I decided to go to Bologna to see his studio where he lived. Strangely enough, met someone from, I think she was from New Zealand, who was writing children's books based on Morandi, and she'd gone there. So that's how the world makes connections. You plant little seeds. Morandi's house is tiny. He lived with his sisters there, and he lived, slept, painted in a room this size. Just phenomenal. And he made all those wonderful paintings in a very small space. And it confirmed so much for me that, you don't need vast studios. You don't need incredible facilities to make something that means something. It's quite an experience. So I'm kind of hoping that that might happen here. I hope it becomes a place for people to come and see what I think is interesting work. I hope they find some kind of inspiration, that there's a connectivity here to something that someone has done with their life that is of importance. Not in any grand sense, but I hope it's a little refuge for people to enjoy.